good. So, James, can you go ahead? We're going to talk about Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil, today. And James had also read it. He's going to school at Arizona State, right?
Unfortunately not. University of Arizona.
University of Arizona.
Yes,
Sorry.
sir.
But I'll let James, I thought before we got too far into it, I'd let James give a little history about himself and where he's, how he got interested in Dirt to Soil.
That is a long road of academic history here. So I actually started off going to college when I graduated high school for law enforcement. I was doing that and had my first knee surgery my freshman year of college. So that kind of kicked that out. Then I started, figured I should have a backup plan. So I'd kind of been tinkering with cars in the background before that. So I figured I should try and make a living at that. So I started the auto program at one of the community colleges in Phoenix. And I've always loved diesel. I've always thought they were big Tonka toys, so it was a blast to work on them. So I figured I should try my hand at that. Got into the diesel program up in the northern part of the state that was partnered with one of the mines up here. So I was working for them, working on anything from haul trucks to bulldozers to a little bit of everything in between. Let's see, graduated there and was working on generators after that. I was helping run a company, a very small generator repair company down on the west end of the state, and had my second knee surgery. And so I figured if I want to walk when I'm 50, I should probably change careers yet again. And all in the background of this, my grandparents lived out in the country. And so that's what kind of ignited my passion for farming. I'd always been around it, spent every waking second I could out by a farm field, helping them, working on whatever they could. And it's been in my history on both sides of the family. My great-grandparents on both sides of the family had farms. In fact, my great-grandfather on my mother's side had the first automated milk carousel in Arizona. So unfortunately, kind of cool history there. Unfortunately, they both sold off before I was even thought of. So I never got to truly play my hand at that. I've been involved in agriculture on and off throughout my careers. My cousin has a custom hay baling company, and so I was working for him when I was going to college, and did that during the summers. So yeah, I've always been loosely tied to it. So I figured I should probably make some money at it.
I know you guys get a crazy amount of cuttings down there. How many cuttings were they getting?
Gosh, if it's a good year, we can get anywhere from 8 to 10. So we're cutting every 28 days. So if we're lucky, we'll start in about early to mid-February and then end. Let's see, I was out there last weekend and they were just starting to wind down, so they might have one more cutting.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
What got you interested in Gabe Brown and Dirt to Soil?
So in 2015, I was spending time at a good friend's house, and we had always had agriculture in our background, so we figured we should take a crack at it, and we went out and bought our first bull. And unfortunately, that didn't end too well. We were leasing some property, and the property owner did not realize, after wisely being instructed to please not feed our bull horse hay. And so I got a phone call one dreadful morning that my bull had bloated. So that put a short stop to that. But in between that, we had gone up to Joel Salatin's farm summer of 2015 and got to do a farm tour, a 3-day farm tour up there, and picked his brain. And he had mentioned some guy named Gabe Brown up in North Dakota was doing cover crops. And I love YouTube. I think it's a great way to learn. So I typed his name in and found every video I could on him. So that's what got me knowing who Gabe Brown was and what he did. And so I've been tinkering with that name for about 4 years now, and finally got to meet him this last summer. I went up to his place in North Dakota and got a farm tour and got to see what he does.
Well, you're going to be the expert in this conversation.
I don't know about that. I'm just good at talking.
So I thought the best way to go about this would be just to go over his 5 principles for soil health.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot here.
Well, I'm going to read them off so you're not.
Oh, good. Okay.
So I thought we could just go one by one and talk about them and sort of see where See, I'm going at it from the ranching side, and since you've actually seen it in action on the Brown farm and
Yep.
at Solitons, then you'll have a little bit wider expertise than I would. So, or you'll that's a what a lucky call to pick you of all people. So, the first one is limited juice distribution, limited mechanical or disturbance. Sorry,
Yes.
limited disturbance, limited mechanical, chemical, physical disturbance of the soil.
So I can definitely touch on that, especially in Arizona. People love to till, and actually we are getting away from tillage. We're starting to do a lot of no-till with the Roundup Ready stuff, but that has its own problems as well, as we know with glyphosate, and even gramoxone has its own issues. But what I have personally observed over the years is baling in Arizona farm fields. You go through and it's like driving on concrete. And you definitely have a nice solid foundation that you're working on when you drive trucks through there. You never have to worry about getting stuck.
Yeah.
And going out to Gabe's place, it was really cool. He starts off, he shows you one of his neighbors that had been tilling and spraying for 20 years. And then he goes to a neighbor that had been doing no till, but still spraying, or was still spraying. And then he showed an organic farmer that was still tilling. And then he goes to his farm. And you're starting to get a little bit of differences in the first three. One's not quite as hard. And I felt like a little pansy up there. He had me try and break some of the soil in one of the fields with a shovel, and I was jumping on that thing, couldn't get it to bust. And then we get to his place, and you could sink that shovel by just setting it down. They would go 6 inches down. And so it was really cool seeing the differences of that soil, of actually seeing dirt to soil. And unfortunately, in Arizona, we have a lot of dirt and not a lot of soil.
All right. Well, what I've been learning is, so we have some fields that were farmed in the past, but they've mostly recovered. So
good. And
I don't want to use that in a bad way, but that was 20, 30 years. So what I've learned is if you don't disturb them over a long enough period of time, they sort of heal back to what they were.
It's amazing. Funny you mentioned that. I just started Dr. Montgomery's book, Dirt, and he talks about how Darwin had observed fields of his that he had for 30 years and how he could see the amount of soil shifting from the earthworm castings. So yeah, you're definitely hitting the nail on the head there.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I just started that book, but I haven't got it quite as far into it as you have. But yeah, that North Dakota soil is something else. I can't imagine how deep do you think his soil, as far as it goes, there?
I think he said the deepest he's got, I think his topsoil, don't quote me on it, but I want to say about 20 inches or so. I know he's got at least a foot. I know his organic matter is anywhere from, I think the lowest is about 6, and then they're seeing about 11% organic matter on the high end on some real good spots he's got.
Yeah. And then the next one is the Armor.
Yes.
Keeping soil
Armor's good
at all times. And I think this would be interesting to talk about Arizona. How do they deal with Armor in Arizona? It seems like there's probably crops on it most year round, but when they till it up or farrow it, or do they even do that down there?
Yeah, so if it's alfalfa, it's gonna be year round. We'll get at least 5 good years. I've seen guys go at least 15 years of what they say has been a good alfalfa crop. So that can lead to a long-lasting monoculture. But then we'll go from cotton to corn or sorghum or wheat or barley. And so there'll be tillage. There can be fallow ground. In fact, you go out towards the west side where I spent a lot of time, and it's a lot of bare empty fields. They're just letting them sit or rotate or whatever they think might be best for it. But yeah, there's a lot of empty fields. And then when I was talking about that Roundup Ready that they would spray in, when they're doing a wheat crop, they will take the swather in and cut that stalk. And so there's not a lot there. And then they love running the disc after that. So they think running that disc is a great way to get some nutrients. And we know the effect of that too. Ray Archuleta describes it best as setting your house on fire to cook a hot dog.
Yeah. I love some of his
he has a very good way.
my favorite one was he was talking to her. I saw a thing he must have done around Halloween, and he goes, "If you want to hear something scary, or you want to think about something scary, think what happened if Gabe Brown fell down one of his fields." He said the microbiome would eat it before he could get back up.
That's right.
But with the armor that we have here is sort of interesting because we have cover and grass and different forbs that grow in the pastures. But then when you get out into the rangelands, you just have this vast landscapes of great sage.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually sort of create their own cover, and every year they shed the leaves, and then it covers the space around it. And that allows the grasses that grow under the sagebrush to have a chance to, it soaks up the moisture and it sort of protects them from the sun and lets them get a good start so they can get established and really grow. And they're protected from the drifts and everything. And that little ecosystem underneath those big Great Basin sage sort of provides a different type of armor that you probably wouldn't know about if you just read Gabe Brown's book. But that armor plays such a role across ecosystems, and I don't think it looks the same in each one. So again, probably what it looks like in Arizona versus what it looks like in North Dakota is completely different as to what it looks like in the Great Basin rangeland.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point of what you were saying about how there's some geographical things that may be unique, and so that sagebrush is definitely a good example. Our rangelands are definitely a little bit more sparse than what you've probably got. We have a lot more bare soil in between each clump of grass we've got for sure. But with our farmland, it's actually a sad conversation. I was calling up, I've been trying to find land out here. I'm sure you've seen my post on that. And
yeah,
I was talking to the extension agent in the area, and I was, talking about cover crops, thinking it'd be cool to show, that's not really a big thing out in Arizona. And he said, oh, well, there's people doing that. There's one lady in the entire county that does that. So I think we're covered there. I'm thinking to myself, one lady out of the entire county, and you think that's a success. And it really plays to, we've got extreme heats here. If we've gotten the hottest picture I ever took when working out in a hayfield was 140 is what it registered outside. And I'm sure there was a little bit of a lyometer on the truck thermostat there, but I think at the airport it registered at 126, 127, somewhere in there. But as you know in the book, they talk about with cover of what that can do to soil biology and keeping the temperature down. And then in winter, being able to keep the temperature up. So that's a huge issue here is all our soil biology is getting killed without having those covers. We're not having a great biology going on there. And so that's our biggest issue, I think. And so it'd be really cool to start seeing some people try and do that. And, there's a lot of economic value to it as well. I was talking to one gentleman that was at the New Mexico conference that I went to a couple of weeks back, and he's out here in Casa Grande, which is about it's about the halfway point between Tucson and Phoenix of the two major cities. And he's doing a lot of covers. He's finally starting to get on the train there and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So it's cool to start seeing some people pick it up. But for the most part, those are the only two people I know of and have seen here. There's maybe one or two that I've actually seen them trying to experiment, but nothing really on a big commercial scale. So yeah, cover definitely important.
Let's hit diversity. Strive for diversity of both plant and animal species. And this is something I'm just learning about, but the diversity is so important to the organic nitrogen cycle, is what I've learned. And so like not only when you have a monoculture, you're depleting the soil, but you're actually not priming that organic nitrogen cycle. So you need the interaction of different plants playing off of each other to stimulate the different types of nutrients and stuff that they call from within the soil. So the plants are actually sending signals out, or they're out looking for different types of stuff. And the one plant might add it, the other plant takes it away. What's your understanding about the diversity? I think that's one of the things that most people are missing in this as they're thinking about the future, is just the great amount of diversity that you need to try and encourage.
Yeah, absolutely. Gabe mentions it of where do we see monocultures in nature? It's rarely ever. And so definitely, if we're trying to mimic nature, trying to get back to that of we need to have diversity, you hit it right on the head saying about how nitrogen and phosphorus cycles and carbon sequestration with that. It was really interesting at one of the conferences, I think it was in Tennessee that I attended, it really clicked of they were talking about how throughout that entire mycorrhizal fungi network, there might be a plant down at the end of your field that might need some more nitrogen, and you've got one at the other end of the field that's got a little bit extra. So it can carry it through that entire network, which I thought was just the coolest thing. Nature is so incredible. So without that diversity, you're going to have that degradation that we're seeing right now with these depleted soils. And so absolutely with the plants, and then even to speed it up a little bit further, depending on what your goals are of getting into biodiversity with your different species of animals. We're actually talking about this in one of my classes right now, the difference between cattle being grazers, sheep being intermediate eaters, and goats are great at browsing, and goats love eating everything.
Well, and one of the things I took away from Gabe's book is the pigs, as far as coming through, cleaning up after the cattle. I always thought they would sort of act as nature's rototiller, like in problemed areas. The pig seems to me the best tool to sort of just put that, to maybe go over it with a cow or a sheep, and then have that pig come in and know that it's going to take a little bit more time to recover. But what the pig did was really disrupt it and bring in really sort of make sure that organic cycle was really sort of jump started. So
definitely,
I got an interest. I thought it was interesting how he was utilizing pigs, and I took from the book that he wasn't quite all the way there with the pigs, but he definitely saw that they had a unique value, and finding the right one for North Dakota and how to manage them was sort of still in his mind, and he hadn't completely resolved that. But I've always been fascinated by that.
Definitely. And to further that along, I know this was a couple of years back, but he had mentioned that if he had the time to manage the pigs, if he wasn't out, when I saw him in, is that July, late end of July, he said he'd already been on 200 flights this year. And so between him, his son, and I think it was his son's girlfriend is working there. Basically, the three of them, it's a little hard to, you'd have to be out there moving them daily, is what he was seeing, because they are tilling. They're trying to get, they don't want as much tillage on their crop fields as what they're getting, but definitely out in the surrounding areas and more of the perennial pastures, it's definitely a good thing. Joel Salatin was doing the same thing. When we did the farm tour, we were seeing, he had, I want to say it was 7 paddocks, and they were moved every 2 weeks, or when his feeder ran out, and I want to say that's like 1,500 pounds, whatever the set poundage he had on the feeder, he moved to a new paddock, and that was out in the woods. And it was so cool to see where the pigs were going around eating grass, and then that paddock 7, how tall the grass had gotten. And then right across the way, it was all undisturbed. He'd had for 30 years that the slope was just too bad. He couldn't really do anything with. And just how, I mean, compared to what he's doing with the pigs, it looked degraded. And so you're absolutely right with the pigs being great natural tillers. So if they get in there, they disturb, they get that biology going. So yeah, absolutely. Pigs are awesome, and they are a great price point. Gabe says if he could turn everything he makes into bacon, he'd be a billionaire.
Yeah. So. Living roots, maintaining a living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. That's sort of the limited disturbance, I think, and armor both sort of rolled into one. Some of these sort of play on each other. I think it's cycle. It's like a cycle.
Definitely.
I mean, the roots are so important to that. And I think that we're just starting to learn about that. You said it better than I'm going to say, but the fungal microbiome. Mm-hmm. And those roots have to be there. They have to be either dormant or alive for those microbiome, that fungal system to function.
Yeah, definitely. With that mycorrhizal fungi, I think they said the life cycle of that's about 2 weeks. And so living roots are essential. And plus you're getting your sequestration, even if it's his big example, him being extremely cold, even though those plants may be dormant or dead, they still have sequestration in the roots. And so they're still going to be cycling that liquid nitrogen, depending on if it's a legume, trying to do nitrogen fixation, whatever it may be, he's in that specific field, but that root is still working. And so it's keeping that soil warmer in the winter, colder in the summer, and you have your biology that's constantly evolving, living, dying, and growing. And so you have to have food for it. And so that's the food source right there, is your living root.
Yeah. And I like how the root, as your soil gets better, that root just because it gets more dense, it gets less dense. Like you
Hmm.
said, you could drive across the plate. You never had to worry about it, and you get sick. But when your soil starts getting sort of spongy, you need that root system to just hold it all together. It's so loose and it's almost fluffy in parts
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
yeah. And so that soil system, that root holds that all together, and yeah. But yeah, I think that it's for me being a rancher, it's hard not to imagine that root system always being there. So it's hard for me to conceive of a farm where that doesn't exist. So you've probably seen it firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. Once again, with them either having fallow fields or taking that disc or that ripper through there, trying to get that topsoil turned up. Of you're killing everything that's in that first 6 inches there. So definitely, but yeah, on the ranching side, like you're saying, we're not out typically with a tiller or anything trying to cut any new pasture or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, we definitely have good root system on. My friends in New Mexico, for example, they've got a ranch out there, and so yeah, it's cool to see everything that's still out there. Of you've always got a living root.
Yeah, I feel so sorry that New Mexico's been through such a drought, hasn't seen the monsoons like it should. But
Yeah, it's been an
uh,
interesting summer.
yeah, but I missed the monsoons. Hopefully next year they'll get them. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
And then the last one is we sort of hit on this, but I wanted to make a point on this one that I think that gets left out in the regenerative conversation and sort of got left out of Gabe's book and like Saladin and it's a sort of a West Coast, unique to West Coast and the part of the country we're living in is the integrated animals um, and how they interact in the thing. So we've talked about the pigs and the sheep, but I think one of the key things that we're leaving out of the conversation is wildlife. Every ranch ecosystem supports an abundant amount of so we feed deer, we raise a lot of ducks. So Canadian geese stop over here and have their baby chicks,
Oh wow.
and they do it in our canals and the cover, and they're protected with the cattle around, which isn't that important, but they'd have them somewhere else, but it just gives them that extra layer of protection
Hmm.
to bring those chicks up to full grown. But yeah, by keeping the rangelands and the species, so what we're not, we may not, I may be able to add sheep, maybe some pigs, but on the scale that I'm talking, or like a ranch in New Mexico, that would be very difficult to manage all those multiple species. But the revelation I had was, well, we are managing a lot of species. They sort of manage themselves, their wildlife, and they also play a role in that ranch land ecosystem. And so I think that needs to be a bigger part of the conversation. And when you're a guy like Gabe, you're probably not. He does talk a lot about the deer that's come back and that kind of stuff, but
Yes.
I don't think that's a thought that a lot of people have. Is there's that component of regenerative that is also beneficial in the bigger picture, the 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think he probably looks at it on more of like an insect level of, I know he talks about a lot about the prey versus predator insects that come back. But a great example to give was Alejandro Carrillo down in Chihuahua. He's seen, I wish I could quote how many birds that come back. There's so many bird watchers that come out and societies for birds that come out and observe how many species have returned. And so that was the biggest thing he saw was his wildlife, because he's in a great ranching area of when he started getting growth coming back. If he's got deer coming through there, javelina, coyotes, bobcats, it's amazing what he's seen over the last 8 to 10 years come back on his place that wasn't there because, I mean, there was no life. So it's very cool to see everything come back there. But yeah, I mean, wildlife is a huge factor of that.
Did your sound just cut out, or did you stop talking?
Oh, no, I just stopped talking.
I was like,
It's a
oh no.
rarity, I know.
There's a blue bar across your mouth, and I can see you shaking your head. And it's like, oh no.
Oh, gotcha.
um, yeah, so I think we hit all the good points. What was your overall impression? What did you take from the book that you think that you'll use in the future? And overall, what do you think? Do you think it's the type of book that will be impactful enough to start changing? When I think of Gabe's book, I think of Alan Savory's Resource Management, the guide to resource management. I could tell holistic resource management.
Hmm.
it was sort of transformative, and it really affected the trajectory of my life over the last 30 years because my parents went to one of those original institutes in Albuquerque, and
Okay.
a lot of our peer group was those, and it really, I think, changed ranching in the West. So I'm wondering if this will have the same effect on farming, and just your overall impressions and what you think, what kind of catalyst you think this book might be.
Well, I sure hope it's a catalyst, and I would be doing the book a disservice if I didn't add there's actually now a sixth principle, which is context. And
Oh,
so
really?
so he didn't have it in the book. It was added later after he had already published it. But so he talks about context and knowing your area regionally of what works there may not work anywhere else. And so truly understanding context of, he likes to say, of just because it works on my ranch doesn't mean it'll work on yours. So know your land, know your area, know your context. But back to the catalytic side, I actually have a professor here that my first semester we had to do a report, and that's how I started talking to Gabe. I used him as an expert advice, and he started going on. And one of the big guys we have down here is Howard Buffett has a farm down in Wilcox, Arizona. Yeah. And so he's been doing this for 20 years on a lesser end of, he's finally coming around to regenerative as just opposed to cover. And so my teacher had made a comment of, if the richest man in the world's son has been doing this for 20 years and hasn't gotten anywhere, what makes you think you will? And so I'm waiting. I'm glad I just finished this book, so now I can hand it to him and have a crack at him and see what he thinks of it. But yeah, I think it's definitely a catalyst of, there's a lot of people that I've been talking to and starting to get to know that it was either this book or Gabe's name or just the idea of no one has ever heard of regenerative agriculture like what we know it as. And so it's fun to have that conversation start. Sometimes they think you're wearing a tinfoil hat. I get some weird looks sometimes, but it does make for good conversation initiation. So especially to see, I know General Mills is one of the biggest contracts that Understanding Ag just got. And so if they're getting on this side of agriculture, I think it's really going to create an upswing, and we're going to start seeing a lot of changes just because economically they're going to have to. If they want to get top dollar for what they're producing, they're going to have to follow this. So I think it's great that we're going about it where we'll actually hit them in the checkbook instead of just doing it ecologically. So yeah, I think this book is going to have a pretty good impact. I think it's had a good impact. It'll be cool to see what people come up from this to the popularity and level of Gabe Brown, Ray Archuleta, Joe Salatins of the future. So
yeah, no, I think that's an interesting thing. Who will that be in? I would like to see. I have found that I think that the path forward is going to be an inclusive path forward, and I have been preaching that it should include as many people as possible and not get into those exclusive practices that we've got in the past where we sort of tribalize. And I think that that's really important, to try and keep these conversations as broad as possible and not eliminate anybody, because, and I also preach about not shaming people for the practices because they're just trying to survive.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think this is a transition, and we need to keep it exclusive and not inclusive. So, and I think that we have a tendency as a species, as an animal, to be inclusive, and that kills these type of movements. We have to keep it as exclusive as possible. That's my rant for this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's cool to be able to talk to different people that have completely different viewpoints on a lot of different things that I have, but it's cool to see them be able to connect with me about this. We all have a common goal of being able to see finally some progressive movement on this and some positive traction going here. And so I've always kind of coined the phrase of, I think every farmer cares about his land as far as his checkbook allows. Yes. So it's nice to finally see something brought up as an economic viewpoint as opposed to just an ecological viewpoint. So I think we're definitely on the right track. I think it's going to change a lot of things. And I know Gabe and Ray have both said it. I'm sure there's a lot more people that have. Of the worst phrase you can have is, that's because the way I've always done it. So I think we're finally starting to get some really cool examples to get some eyes opened here and get some lifestyles changed.
Well, I think it's interesting you brought up the Howard Buffett one, because I read his book. And
40 Chances.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, he spent $1 billion finding out that agriculture is really, really tough. And we don't necessarily have all the answers in the United States, in that it's going to take this really global sort of stepping back like a couple decades to get back to what was working before, and all the inputs, and everybody got compartmentalized and everything, and the multinational companies, which I'm not complaining about, but when they started having more and more sway over how things were marketed and that kind of stuff. And I think if anything, was he had a glimmer of hope at the end of the book, but I don't think he knew just how tough of a slog it was going to be to transform agriculture. And if somebody with resources like that gets bogged down, then it means that this is like the willows. When you can break one stick together, but you have to have a lot of sticks together. So a guy just like one Howard Buffett out there with this huge philanthropic organization behind him is not going to be able to get us where we need to get with this regenerative movement to ultimately make the end customer happy and to have a greater positive effect on all of society.
No, you're definitely right there. And I think it's something that I've seen for sure is being able to connect with different people with just the phrase regenerative agriculture, and being able to see how vast that's gotten me. This summer, for instance, I started up at Gabe's Ranch in North Dakota, and then I had some friends out in Wisconsin that I went and saw their dairy, and they thought I was wearing the tinfoil hat, but it at least was a good conversation starter. And I made my way down to South Dakota, got to tour. A good friend of mine's, their family has an organic farm out there, and it was interesting to see the inner workings of that and what can be fixed and what can be worked upon, and see what good things they're doing, see what things may need to get changed over towards a regenerative style, just to kind of get it kicked in the pants a little bit farther on what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, it definitely created some openings for me and got to get some new friendships, you especially, and you've seen what we've been kind of going back and forth on LinkedIn. I actually just met some people through Facebook in New Zealand, of all places, that because of regenerative agriculture. So it's cool to see what is going on all facets of the world. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a really cool community.
Yeah, they're big down there. That's big down in Australia and New Zealand. That's a good place. And so is like the Netherlands and that region of the world. So yeah,
very cool.
It's anyways, we probably got to wrap it up, but I want to know what you're planning for the future now that you got all this education and you have all this worldly experience that I was unaware of. You must have some high-powered plan to go forward.
Yeah, so plans probably change, every 3 days or so, but I think I'll finally get one that sticks. Finishing school is definitely the first one I've got. After this semester, I've got 2 left, and then I'll be a final graduate of the University of Arizona with my economic resource management degree. And from there, I'd like to find a farm, whether it be leasing, owning, working on whatever it may be, but at least get my foot in the door, trying to start these things as fast and hard as possible. Start building up my own farm, getting these principles enacted, and getting to show people what I can do with it. And from there, who knows, I'd like to say the sky's the limit, maybe do a little bit of consulting, have some farm tours, whatever it may be, but trying to show this to as many people as possible and get the word out that regenerative agriculture is the best kind of agriculture. It's just so much fun. There's a different thing every day.
So much possibility.
Absolutely.
And you feel good about it at the end.
You truly do. And it's great when you can look at your checks and see that you're signing the back of it instead of the front of it. That's a refreshing feeling too.
Gabe's pretty good about mentioning that about every 25 pages, I think, in the book. But yeah,
absolutely.
Well, James, it's been a great conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking.
Hey, thank you for having me, Rich. This has been a blast.
And I'd like to say that everybody on LinkedIn will watch it, but it might be watched by just a few select people. But I think they'll get a lot out of it.
I hope so.
And I look forward to continuing our friendship. And if you ever get the itch to come tour again, come check out the ranch in Oregon.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a blast.
I was showing somebody around last night. It's like chefs like to feed other chefs, and people in agriculture like to show off what they're doing. So
Yeah, I saw that video. I'll try and make sure the truck doesn't get stuck this time.
Oh yeah, every time. Something goes wrong. All right, James. Well, good night, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Rich.